Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I'm Kemper Donovan.
I'm Catherine Broback.
And this week we are discussing The Veiled Lady, a Poirot short story first published October 3rd, 1923 in The Sketch. And let's get right into the victim of our story, the alleged victim of our story.
Spoiler!
Lady Millicent Castle Vaughan, the fifth daughter of an impecunious Irish peer, about to marry the very wealthy, if a bit particular, Duke of Southshire. She is a victim because she's being blackmailed by one Mr. Lavington to the tune of £20,000 for an indiscreet letter that she wrote to a young lover when she was younger and less discreet herself. We've all been there, except nowadays it's not a letter, it's a YouTube video that is impossible to scrub away.
Or
from
any number of emails that perhaps you decided to BCC other people on.
Or reply alls.
Oh.
That would be kind of, if you were going to do like an updated Poirot, it would be like, Mr. Poirot, you have to help me. I accidentally replied all, and now everyone hates me. And he'd be like, yeah, I can't help you.
Nothing to be done, my friend. Pick a new name, go into hiding, and whatever you do not reply all to say, stop replying all.
Very quickly, because this story hangs on things not being as they appear to be, the suspect here is the aforementioned Mr. Lavington, who is a con man and a blackmailer, and the person that Lady Millicent has identified as being the one who is trying to squeeze her for money that she does not yet have. Let's just get right into the world as it appears to be when Lady Millicent visits Poirot's office. Catherine, take it away.
So Poirot is terribly bored. We have found him in this condition at the beginning of other short stories. But he just figures that all crime in England has dropped to basically nothing because criminals fear his name. This is probably not actually true.
So he's basically, I solved all the crime. It's just over.
All the crime. Yeah, it's just done. He's just going to have to, work on his mustache and listen to Captain Hastings. But Captain Hastings, not to be deterred, continues to read Poirot stories from the newspaper. Mm-hmm. So one of the ones that he fixates on is basically a smash and grab jewel theft. Jewels were stolen out of a storefront window. The thief was immediately caught by a group of concerned citizens, and then when he was brought to Scotland Yard, he had the jewels in hand, except as it turns out, they were paste jewels.
Right, so one of the concerned citizens was actually an accomplice who did a little switcheroo and took the
but Poirot was basically like, that is just too basic.
Exactly. Poirot was not impressed. He's like, that is some basic crime right there. Hastings.
He's like,
try
shut
again.
Up, Hastings. Yeah,
Denied.
do not even talk to me about this.
This is, though, such a good example where, we're in a short story, so let's not be lulled by how entertaining it is that Poirot dismisses the story into dismissing this little anecdote as readers, because in a short story, Christie does not make mention of a crime for no reason, so just bear that in mind. He mentions this random man who's killed in a British man killed in Holland, and that's it.
Poirot attributes it to the tinned fish.
To tinned fish, exactly.
Which seems reasonable.
It does seem reasonable.
Yeah.
It probably is usually tinned fish.
Yeah, botulism, guys. If a can is bulging, put it back or throw it away.
Oh, is that how you know?
Yeah.
If the can is bulging?
Yeah, if a can is bulging, it means that air has gone inside of it, and that can create bacteria, which creates botulism.
Oh, good. The more you know.
The
Catherine
more
Broback.
you know. Okay. PSA here. So while Poirot is, mentioning those tinned fish, he sees a heavily veiled lady walking up to his flat, which obviously must only mean one thing. She is there to see him.
Of course. This is Lady Millicent, who we already mentioned, who then goes into her story about how she's being blackmailed by this Mr. Lavington, who's come into possession of a romantic letter she wrote to a soldier during the war, as one does. And she does not have the $20,000 that Mr. Lavington is demanding. and he says he's going to give the letter to the Duke and thereby ruin Lady Millicent. She's kind of in a catch-22, or a catch-22K, or a catch-20, anyway, because
it was a noble effort.
Right? She'll have the money once she gets married. I think Poirot even suggests she could raise the money off of her impending marriage. Like, there are definitely loan sharks that'll be like, sure, you're about to be a rich lady. I'll give you some money and charge you 50% interest. But she's not interested in doing that, which, given her dire situation, perhaps is the first thing that should give us a little pause, that she doesn't really seem to be open to solving this problem in any way other than employing the efforts of Monsieur Poirot.
Well, she's willing to possibly wrangle up £1,000, right?
Right, but he's right. I mean, she probably could actually get more than that, and she, in any case, it's not that suspicious at that point in the story. I'm not saying I was suspicious at all at this point, but Poirot agrees to help her, and he arranges for Lavington to meet at his office to discuss terms. Lavington comes in, but he laughs it off, at the same time mentioning that he is headed overseas. He'll be gone for a number of days, and that if the 20K is not paid by his return, then it's curtains for Lady Millicent and her fancy marriage.
And speaking of curtains, we should mention that I know I already did that she was wearing a heavy veil, but first of all, the title of the story. So, if you missed that one, that's on you. But it is interesting that this lady is so heavily clothed. And I only mention it because this might actually be the only clue that we're given in the story.
Right, the story doesn't really have many clues.
No, it really doesn't. And the fact that this lady is a socialite who is just like wearing a lot of layers, that might be the one thing that a good Christie reader should always be suspicious of.
Anyone who's in any way hiding or blurring their appearance. True.
That brings us to the world as it actually is, which I'm just gonna.
You kind of just have to say it. What I'm realizing actually as we're doing this, I didn't think it at the time, but this is a mini thriller.
It is kind of a mini thriller. There's not actually a mystery here, and there aren't actually any clues. There is a clue, but the thing about it is we're not given it. And
are you talking about the shoes?
I'm talking about the shoes, but we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. I agree. That's so frustrating that we're not given that. Anyway.
Right, and it's the only clue other than the veil. And so we'll get to that. But I also think the whole resolution is a cheat. So I'm prefacing all of this to say I'm not a huge fan. So we're going to go into it on that basis.
And I might be a little bit more of a fan of this one than you, actually.
Well, that will be good. It's good when we have It's good when we have differences, Kemper.
I agree.
Here's basically what Poirot decides. Poirot, because he's so bored, has also been complaining that it's really great for the whole world that he decided to be an upstanding citizen and not an arch criminal. So
it kind of made me think of you and your distrust of Miss Marple, which I'm still smarting from.
I know. You're having such a hard time. I'm so sorry.
Because I feel like that's what you accuse poor Miss Marple of, potentially being this mastermind evil.
I never said evil. I was not making a moral judgment.
I just never even went there with Miss Marple, so it was interesting that in this story we read so soon after having that conversation, Poirot himself goes there.
He does, and Poirot does not make a moral judgment of it in this case either. He just simply breaks bad.
Right.
He decides that in fact he's going to burglar Mr. Lavington. And Hastings is pretty on board with this, I think.
Hastings is totally on board with it. Hastings is Jesse Pinkman.
Yeah, Mr. White. Yes, science.
Yeah, absolutely. Under cover of darkness, they break into Mr. Lavington's Wimbledon house.
Well, but it's even better than that. It's even more devious than that, because before they break in, Poirot's
already gone there, but we only get that as an aside in the short story. It's a drawn out to great length in the adaptation.
And to great effect, I have to say, in the adaptation. I thought that was delightful in the adaptation.
Oh, it was. We'll get to that. But in the short story, it's really only mentioned as an aside because Poirot can so easily lift the sash of the window. Mm-hmm. And Hastings is like, by God, Poirot, why is the window not locked? And Poirot is basically like, oh, because I sawed through it earlier in the day.
Early in the day when I impersonated a person who was putting locks, irony, on the windows. Indeed, and was just let in.
Indeed, he was supposed to be burglar-proofing the house, and apparently he said that all the windows were electrified, and so the servants then couldn't touch any of them.
Right, and they just believed him. Poor saps.
So they break in, and they look for this Chinese box, which is apparently holding the incriminating letter.
Right, and a Chinese box is just a box that has a hidden compartment in it, right? Like it's a box that it is difficult to open.
It's a puzzle box.
Right. Eventually, after much snooping to no avail, Poirot realizes that as it is summertime, the least obvious place to hide the Chinese box, would be over the coal bin and under the firewood. And he actually goes into the coal bin and ruins his very nice light suit, pulls out a fake log.
It seems very, very suspicious that in the short story, he's wearing a very nice light suit to burglar a house.
To burgle, yeah. The short story doesn't commit to the notion of Poirot as burglar in the way that they did in the Suchet series, but good on the Suchet series because it's so much fun. If you're going to do it, just do it. You know, go all in. But yeah, Christie, I think, was a little uncomfortable with this. There's a bit of glossing that happens with the whole burglary subplot in this story.
One might say.
Yeah. Because he, like, in his, like, little spats and light gray morning suit, he's climbing
into a coal bin and digging through firewood. I mean, okay.
I did, by the way, I felt like it was a little bit of a callback to what might be the first clue in any Poirot or Christie novel, A Mysterious Affair at Styles, when there's a fire lit in July. And we're supposed to realize that that's crazy because why would you light a fire in July? So
right, and so why would you ever pull firewood in July, which makes it a natural hiding place?
Exactly. So he finds this fake log, which contains the Chinese box, and he steals it. He steals the Chinese box. They climb back out the window and into a cab and a cab driver who must be somewhat oblivious since Poirot must be literally covered in coal dust at this point. Although, to be fair, knowing Monsieur Poirot, he would probably have dusted himself off as much as possible, perhaps after exiting the house before getting into the cab. I mean, I can't imagine that he would want to be seen in coal dust.
It's in the middle of the night, too.
I know. Yeah, I mean, this just goes into the whole glossing over of the mechanics of how that burglary actually took place. This is the point at which now we get to the crux of what is really happening here in the world, Catherine.
Lady Millicent shows up to retrieve the letter, and she's incredibly grateful. Just incredibly grateful that this has been found and that she is saved. And, you know, she's so grateful that she would also really like that Chinese box as a souvenir to remind her constantly about how grateful she is.
Yeah, just a little keepsake. Poirot is insistent on keeping the box himself as a souvenir. She's like, no, I really, really want it for myself. And then Poirot name drops Inspector Japp, and then Inspector Japp appears
from behind a curtain,
as he tends to do in these short stories, kind of from out of nowhere in the last page.
He happens to be like always behind, like hiding behind something, or hiding in Poirot's flat, or
he's actually in Poirot's bedroom in this one.
Ooh! To
my utter amazement, Japp himself stepped out from Poirot's bedroom.
Well, I'd be somewhat amazed too.
And then the oh-so-posh and dulcet-toned Lady Millicent immediately drops the act and says, "Nabbed by the Lord, you nippy old devil."
I know, but the funniest thing about it is not only is she supposed to be posh, she's supposed to be Anglo-Irish. So, like, the difference there, the accent difference is really a lot.
Well, she's good at accents. She's the Meryl Streep of street criminals.
Street criminals, yeah.
With all due respect, sir, I have done battle every single day of my life, and many men have underestimated me before. This lot seem bound to do the same, but they will rue the day. Now, shall I be mother?
Yeah, Jap and all is hello, Gertie. Because
Hello,
of course her name,
Gertie.
yeah, of course her name's Gertie too.
I know, it can't just be like Jane.
No, it's Gertie. Also, the fact that apparently she's incredibly well known by the law.
Right, well, which is perhaps why she veiled herself so heavily while she was walking down the street.
Oh, it definitely is. But at the same time, it's very bold of her to go on this impersonation mission if she's so well known by Scotland Yard.
Absolutely. I guess the veil helped a little bit, but...
We should also say, because I don't know that we have, that the other half of the Chinese box is filled with the smash and grab jewels.
Right, the smash and grab jewels that were that throwaway reference that Hastings made at the beginning of the short story, which ended up being key. And then, last but not least, but kind of least, actually, because of the way that it was presented, last but totally least, is the one clue, which is that Poirot mentions at the end, we are never given any indication of this as readers, either from Poirot or Hastings or anyone, that she had bad shoes. She had shabby shoes. And a real lady might have shabby clothing. Her dress might be shabby. She doesn't have a lot of money, but her shoes would always be impeccable. Which I don't know if I really even agree. I mean, I kind of get what he means, because I think shoes are such a baseline kind of a thing. So it's like, if you're going to cut corners, you don't cut corners on shoes, you cut corners on a dress. And he just didn't believe that the real Lady Millicent would have such shabby shoes, even though she was impoverished.
I don't know if that remains true in this day and age, but historically, that is definitely a sign. If you're supposed to examine somebody's social status, you're always supposed to look at their shoes.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Think about this for a second. If you think about the importance of shoe-shine men in, like, every train station or, office buildings. I mean, the idea that your shoes are up to snuff is incredibly important, and that's historically just a major indicator. You could hand make clothes, right? Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily need to store buy a dress. Perhaps if you're very talented at home,
right,
you can make it out. You can Scarlett O'Hara it or Maria von Trapp it and make it out of the curtains.
Right, but you can't really cobble shoes.
No, unless Maria von Trapp had really hardcore additional skills that we were not shown.
I feel like Maria von Trapp might have actually been able to cobble shoes. If she had wanted to, she totally would have been able to.
Totally possible. But yeah, so because you could, potentially make clothes at home, the thing that you couldn't make is shoes. And so that's why they are generally considered, at least historically, a status indicator.
Right. Oh, and did we mention, by the way, that the real Mr. Lavington was the man killed in Holland, which is why the other guy impersonating him was able to do so.
A cohort of Gertie.
That's why Mr. Lavington's house was empty. So what happened is that the real Mr. Lavington had the jewels, and he also had what may or may not have been a real letter from the real Lady Millicent. That is a bit unclear in both the story and the adaptation, at least it was to us. But Mr. Lavington absconded to Holland, where he was apprehended by some of Gertie and this non-Mr. Lavington's associates or henchmen and killed. And at the same time, Gertie and Mr. Not Lavington were trying to use Mr. Poirot for their own purposes to locate those jewels, which they apparently knew would be in this Chinese box along with that letter. It's unclear why one box would hold two such presumably valuable possessions to a criminal, such as the real Mr. Lavington, but hey, makes for a good story, I suppose. So let's talk a little bit about the adaptation, which I quite enjoyed. This was
The adaptation's good on this
It's
one.
really good. This was season 2.
Unlike last week's, which I don't think we cared for.
No, we did not. It's nice to have one that we adore again. And this was season 2, which is right in the middle of the lighter, more delightful and charming Poirot's. And there are just like a couple of moments that I loved, many of them having to do with, again, just going full throttle on Poirot as a burglar. But even before that, so we have the dramatic moment when Lady Millicent, the woman claiming to be Lady Millicent, drops her veil. Because when they first meet her, it's in this lobby and she has it over her face, and finally she goes to a more private area and takes it off. And it's this dramatic moment.
I shall trust you.
My word.
So kind.
He's just made this exclamation, I guess, because she's so beautiful. It's just such a ridiculous moment. And it kind of makes sense, ultimately, that she ends up not actually being who she says she is, because it's just so theatrical. She's just so theatrical in this whole episode. But yeah, the burglar sequence, part of the sequence involves Poirot crawling on his hands and knees on a bathroom floor with spiders crawling around him. Hastings dips his hand in the water tank of a toilet and almost falls. They really go for it. And then I'm definitely going to put a picture of this on our Instagram account at All About Agatha. Poirot's burglar outfit, his like Breaking Bad outfit, this is the equivalent of the hazmat suit from Breaking Bad.
It's all black, and his hair is also not oiled down.
His hair's not oiled, so it's all mussed and kind of frizzy and frowsy.
And almost the wrong color, because his hair is so darkly oiled all the time. It's always quite black. And then,
it's like a lot lighter.
It is lots lighter, especially when he is, wait for it, in jail.
In jail, but also, by the way, in jeans, too. He's wearing denim. He's wearing denim jeans and riding a bike on his way to impersonating the workman to this house.
Right.
That whole sequence, taken in the context of the whole show, is fairly shocking and deeply funny. And we have to emphasize his mustache, and they make the contrast really apparent because there's this extreme close-up of his regular super waxed and turned up mustache, and then we cut to him on the bike in the jeans, and his mustache is totally down and
over
a mess and over his lip. And
although when he actually breaks into the house later in the episode, his mustache is waxed again.
Well, he can only unwax his mustache for so long.
But then one of the best things is when Inspector Japp comes to collect him at the precinct.
Morning, sir.
Morning.
Vicious looking character, isn't he?
He hasn't been any trouble.
No, he's too clever for that. We wanted to get our hands on him for months.
Apart from not giving a name. What is his name?
This is not funny, Japp.
Well, nobody knows his real name. But everyone calls him Mad Dog.
Mad Dog, eh? One fancy ring. One pair of pinch-nose spectacles. One... what is that?
That is my mustache comb.
Moustache comb?
Yes.
You didn't tell me it was one of your unnaturals, sir.
Just give him his things.
It's a mustache comb. We, of course, have a chase sequence, but this one is an in-person chase sequence.
It is. It's not in a car.
Not in a car, so props on that. And I love that they set it in a natural history museum. Like, that was...
it's delightful.
That was an amazing setting.
It has no narrative purpose whatsoever.
None. Like, not even a little bit. It's just really fun to look at. There's dinosaurs, apes. They have a whole thing of Gertie and her cohort, Mr. Not Lavington, are hiding underneath this sheet for a really long time. And
Japp pulls off a sheet from a chimpanzee or an orangutan, maybe?
It's some sort of primate.
He says that he has found one of his relatives, Mr. Not Lavington's relatives.
Right. It's a tense, suspenseful sequence, but it's also funny in addition to being suspenseful, which is what this show does so well. And yeah, I mean, it ends in exactly the same way.
Overall, I mean, it could have used more lemon.
It could have used more lemon. I agree.
I do like Miss Lemon is just completely appalled that they're allowing a blackmailer into the apartment. And I actually noticed it because I feel like I've noticed this not just in the adaptations but in other stories, that there's something particularly unsavory about a blackmailer.
Yeah, it's going again to this notion that sometimes murder of certain people isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, because maybe those people kind of sort of deserve it. But blackmailers generally blackmail people in nefarious ways, and there are people that don't deserve to be blackmailed. Like in Christie stories, they're often blackmailed for quite innocent reasons.
Well, not only that, but the idea that if you were somebody who's going to be blackmailed, it means you have some sort of level of image that makes you some level of decent person. Whether or not that's deeply true is
But in the
unclear.
world of Christie, it's true. I mean, it's part of the social order that she's not really interested in upending. These are people that have something to lose, and blackmailers are a rung below some murderers.
We should come up with a list of the worst ne'er-do-wells in these stories.
Yeah, it's true. It would be interesting because it's actually difficult for a murderer to distinguish him or herself, I think, in Christie, because there's so many of them, and their motives usually fall into one of those 4 L's that P.D. James identified: love, lust, lucre, and loathing. But it's the non-murderer, the people that are doing other things other than murdering. They're often doing them for stranger reasons.
Or they're doing murdering and they're also ruining people's lives in additional ways.
Sure. It actually makes me think of a Miss Marple we won't get to for a while, but it's such a memorable one, The Moving Finger, which is all about poison pen letters in a small town. And it's memorable because it's really awful. Like, the things that are said about people and the ways that it ruins people's lives and just makes everyone so uncomfortable is more awful than 90% of the murders that take place in Agatha Christie novels.
Even if we go back to Murder at the Vicarage, when we're talking about why Griselda was suspicious, it's because the thing that she is trying to prevent is essentially not poison pen letters, but insidious gossip about her husband, because she knows that alone is going to be more undermining than anything else.
Yeah. So that is The Veiled Lady. Join us next week for our next novel, a standalone novel, The Sittaford Mystery. We're not exactly at the right time of year for it, unfortunately, because if I remember correctly, it features being snowed in lots of wintry weather, and we're just about bursting into springtime here, but that's okay. We can use our imaginations. So in the meantime, please feel free to contact us via email at allaboutthedame@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter at allaboutthedame, or on Instagram at allaboutagatha, on Facebook at our Facebook page, All About Agatha. And if you are listening to this podcast via iTunes, please take a moment to rate and review us. We very much look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.